finding individuals willing to serve in some of those congressional districts, which has resulted in those that are appointed in the same district. So we have some ideas that we have bounced back and forth with in helping them. I know there's some other statutes that say if they have trouble finding another willing participant in that district, that another member from another district may be appointed. So there's several options that we can work with. Our attorney, the association, and their attorney, as well as the governor's office. I think they will, moving forward, if they ever have that issue again, that they will provide documentation stating that they could not find members willing to serve from that district, and so they're going to work closely as an association with the governor's office to do the very best they can to find individuals that are willing to serve from those congressional districts.
I have a question while we have a stop. Under Alabama Code Section 34.8A-4F, it states in part, after March 26, 2012, appointments shall be made so that no more than one board member from any congressional district may be appointed to serve at the same time. It doesn't say we'll try to work with you around that. It doesn't say we'll try to work with the governor around that. It is a shall list. This has been an issue since 2015 that has been a significant issue that has been brought up to this board. It has been appointed. There were appointments that were made in 2023 that directly went against the law and what the law required. So, Mr. Warren, we had this discussion the other day. This isn't the first board that you've had that's just blatantly not followed the law. Sure. Yeah, I'm an attorney as well, so let's have that discussion. Okay. Okay.
We cannot do anything about those names, sir. You're putting an onus on us that we don't have the authority. We have nothing to do with that. So please, when you quote that section, look at the entire law.
I'm looking at the law because the law is in the report here. You're the attorney for the board. We have the executive director for the board, and everyone is saying, well, that's not my responsibility. That's not. So is there anyone in the room today whose responsibility that is to make sure that the law is actually followed?
That would be somebody from the Alabama Counseling Association. It's called ALCA.
Okay.
Much like the medical board gets nominations from the credentials committee, not from the board. It's how each individual, and Ms. Wilcox, I know you know, being head of boards, agencies, and commissions, each appointments to boards are specific to the law of that board. So if there's someone here from the association that would like to speak, but I believe it's as Mr. Warren said, you cannot force somebody to volunteer their time to be on a board. And if they're not there, they're not there. But please don't lay this at the foot of the board.
Okay.
I have nothing to do with that.
Well, one of the things that I asked from Mr. Warren, and I appreciate the letters that we've received, was any communications from Mr. Warren or you as the attorney to the association to say, hey, this is a problem. They've addressed this. Can you guys, when you address the appointments to the process, can you tell us?
Years,
I've asked for copies of those letters.
We don't have to have letters. They come to our board meetings.
Okay.
And we tell them in live public, in front of the public. Nothing, no, letters. We tell them in front of the entire public.
Is that in the minutes? Do you have anything to document? Because let's play lawyer to lawyer. Is there a document?
Can you trust me?
No, ma'am, I cannot. I don't know you, and I don't trust people, and we're not put up here. That's not our responsibility to trust you. Our responsibility is to review the board. And I can't believe you would walk into a court or any other line as an attorney and say, just trust me, when we've asked for documentation for what you have.
Sir, it's not up to us. It's not up to, it's the association, and that's in black letter law.
I've just asked for communication that you have to try to guide the association to say when you're appointing someone to our board that you've done this. Now, in your...
I believe you'll find that email
Where?
this morning, but there are other communications, and we will search the minutes. Do I have the minutes on me this morning? No, sir.
I asked for it on the 18th. If any letters, any correspondence that you have, that Mr. Warren would have to be able to show, hey, this is where we've kind of drawn that attention to. This is where we've kind of told the board when you're making these decisions. And it doesn't say, and again, let's go back to the law. It doesn't say, well, you have to find somebody from each district. It says you shall not appoint two people from each from a second district.
Point, sir.
So when we say, and let me finish, because when we say shall not appoint more than one board member from any congressional district, the problem is that there are two board members, which is a direct violation from the law, that are serving in two different congressional districts.
How would you suggest to,
Ma'am, Mr. Warren is making $282,000 a year from this board, and you're an attorney from the board. I would love to see some documentation to show this is what we've tried to do to help the board come compliant.
To the extent that y'all are able to find anything either by letter, email, anything in the minutes, I think it would be helpful to the committee to see that. I will say this, I think, first of all, are those appointments subject to confirmation from the Senate?
No, they're not.
They're not,
your
okay.
governor appointed only?
I was going to take a little bit of a blame from the Senate standpoint that maybe we were negligent in our duty responsibilities to assure that those that came over met the legal qualifications. But it looks like the Senate confirmation and the Senate as a whole is off the hook on that. So.
We would love to have people from each congressional district, but we don't have the power or authority to appoint those persons. And we cannot turn down a governor's appointment. We can't say, Governor Ivey, we cannot put this person on the board that you put on the board because they're in the same
It is my experience that you can easily give that feedback to the appointment person with the governor. So I have not found the governor's office would not accept those recommendations and like the knowledge of make sure that the corrections are appointed. So I would like to caution you on that, because if given the information, I just don't believe they'd submit that.
Well, we will begin to work with the governor's office on that immediately. It's not our intent to have any congressional district represented more heavily than another. That is not our intent.
This has been a significant issue for your board since 2015. That's the problem, is we've had a 2015 report where we've said, hey, you guys really should do this. And then 4 years later, hey, what's going on? And here we are 4 years after that. So 8 years later, we're still talking about significant issue 2015, and your response is just trust me.
No, sir. My response is those reports have been communicated with ALCA for years.
It is perfectly reasonable to ask over a 7.5 year period that there be some type of minutes or documentation to back up that request. That's what was asked the other day. That's what we're asking now. I understand communication and all board of directors' responsibilities to the association. The association has to provide that to you. Surely to goodness, there is a good enough administrative program in place that can provide some type of notice of that.
Yes, sir.
Let me say this.
Yes.
I think the feeling of this committee, and as it relates to this board or any other board going forward, I suspect and feel like it's going to be when there are past significant issues, no matter how minor or major that they may be, and it's been an extended period of time in which they have not been addressed or addressed adequately, that is going to be a concern no matter what board or commission agency comes through
Yes,
this
sir.
committee. I suspect that's going to be a common theme. So
Okay.
am I saying that?
There is a letter from January of 2023 after I became acting executive director. So I was concentrating more on the information from the association instead of including that. But that is a letter under my signature that I will distribute to the committee. But I had several conversations with them and the board liaison. And since this was added by Senator Figures in 2012, she wanted me to express how difficult it has been for them to fill those positions. I will again stress that it is a requirement and not anything else other than that. And so I will do another letter stating that after this review to the committee that I will distribute. But I did myself in January of 23 send a letter reminding them during the nomination process of that code section. So we will work together to make sure that we completely do away with this finding and that there are members that are serving. And I will even ask the governor's office if there's anything that we can do prior to the appointments expiring. So we will do everything that we can. But Dr. Driver did stress to me last night the difficulty that they have experienced in people willing to serve on this board.
And I just point out, I think to Representative Simpson's point, sounds like there's some difficulties. Maybe there's some issues about how those appointments get there, and y'all might not have control. But I think it would be a direct violation of the law, as I understand it, to have two members from the same district, no matter how or why they got there, even if it meant that you had an unfulfilled board without that requisite number. And so I think that's one of the points that, here's the law, and maybe there's some liability on somebody else, but be that as it may, that is the law. So
Yes, sir. And we will do everything we can to correct that.
all right, unless questions or comments specifically about that, okay. Certainly, you're welcome to, if you want to continue to address some of the comments that you heard the other day or something that's in the report, and certainly at any point in time you can jump in, but he may get to the point that you're.
One of the items that was discussed was a sudden increase in revenue at the end of 2020. There were uncertified deposits that we found when we got to the office in Birmingham to the tune of about $340,000. So there were deposits that had been made into the to the bank, but the finance has to certify those from the bank to the state treasury into the board specific fund. So we found that those had not been done. So that was the lack of revenue when it showed 500 and something thousand and no revenue until those funds were certified the end of September of 20 and the beginning of fiscal year October 2020. So those were some of the discrepancies that we found and corrected. I do want to thank the state treasury for allowing, because if you don't certify those funds within a certain period of time, those funds revert to the general fund and cannot be re-retained for the board. So Treasury did work for us, so we wouldn't lose that revenue, and so we were able to deposit that into the board's fund, and so that was the sudden increase. There were no fees that were increased for application processing or license fees.
Representative Underwood, you have a question about that?
Yeah, some of that's going to be just my lack of understanding on processes. So you're saying the funds were deposited, but when they weren't certified, I'm not sure what that means. Who certifies them, and what's the logistics of that?
So once the deposits are made, then you go into the system, into STARS, and do a certification of funds.
Who does that?
So up there, I do not know. So this was between May and September, and then we came on board in September. So the staff was depositing those funds, and then when we started...
I'm sorry, which staff?
The old Birmingham staff.
Oh, okay. So it was staff members of the board and not...
And not anyone to do with us, and
Okay.
the board was
All right.
not aware until the sudden resignation of their director in August of 2020.
Okay. So deposits were made and not certified by the staff.
Correct,
members
and that's
of the
what we
board.
discovered
Yeah.
when we started working with the board in September of 2020.
How many months were they uncertified?
From May to August.
So within the same fiscal year.
Yes,
Okay.
but when it was discovered, we were already in, the state had already closed financial operations on, I think it's August the 15th or something like that. But when we discovered it, we started working with Treasury to be able to secure those funds.
So on the financials, they didn't go back and prior period adjust. They just put them all in the same. I mean, in the new fiscal years when they put them in. Is that what you're saying?
Right, yes, sir.
That wasn't your decision to make. That was the state's.
That was the state's decision
Okay.
to allow us to
Okay.
certify those funds.
Okay.
So in addition to that, on the second page of the information that I distributed were the complaints that we found that had not been acknowledged or investigated. And so those were 26 from fiscal year 18, 29 from fiscal year 19, 17 from fiscal year 2020. And so we completed all of those within a year and a half. So those were all acknowledged, logged into our system, distributed to the board's investigator, the attorney, and the investigative committee, and we were able to dispose of all of those. And when I say dispose, determinations were made whether there was no jurisdiction, closed, or if there were fine or consent agreements. But all of those were handled, in addition to the 56 complaints that were received in fiscal year 22 and 25 that were received in the fiscal year 23. So we had all of that going on at the same time. So we continue to improve procedures. So all renewals are processed online now. We're working on building applications for online. But first, the board is going to work on slimlining some of the applications. They're quite lengthy and need to be looked at. So we will be looking at that very soon and taking care of that as well. So any other questions? As Ms. Cootie mentioned, thank you for passing the wellness program that will take effect September the 1st. That went through this legislative session unanimously in both houses, and we thank Representative Hatcher for handling that for us. And so we will begin a wellness program after September the 1st, which is needed in many professions. So we are thankful for that procedure as well.
Would you introduce the group that you have here representing?
I saw Dr. Atchison come in. We have Dr. Sherry-Andra Crawford from Troy, and then we have Dr. Glenn Hollingsworth from Mobile. Did I see Deborah come in? Okay, so Dr. Atchison was also sitting right there, and she's from Birmingham as well. So she came in.
Okay, Senator Barfoot had to go do roll call, so I'll be taking over the chairmanship of the meeting, so just let me know when you need to talk. I'm going to ask a question about your pass-fail rate, and any of your board members that have taken this on as a passion, or if you can answer this. There seems to be a reduction in the amount of people being able to pass the professional exam. Would you like to answer that, or would any of your board like to answer?
That is a
what you might
national.
be doing?
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Well, what you might be doing towards those efforts?
It is handled by the national, it is a National Association exam and a credentialing exam. So I would like, Dr. Crawford, do you have any information about? Some of our educators that are on the board may be able to answer.
Right, I understood you had some from a couple of the universities, so I'd love to.
Dr. Crawford, can you answer?
What I will say is that
Please make sure to come to the microphone because it's a publicly announced meeting and they're monitoring. Thank you.
Good morning. What I'd like to say is that the national exam has a moving passing score based on the norms for that year. So that passing score will change every year. Honestly, students' ability to pass the exam is directly tied to the curriculum of counseling programs and their preparation for taking the exam. The board doesn't really prepare them to take the exam. The board requires them to take it for the purposes of licensure. In terms of the pass rates, I honestly can't speak to the decrease in students' ability to pass the test. I will tell you that we have new curriculum standards for counseling. We moved into the 2016 standards a few years ago, and that kind of changed the test a little bit. And now we're moving into the 24 standards, which will change the test even more. And so students are going to have to prepare a little bit differently to be successful at that exam.
Well, it is my passion that when students pay tuition and parents help with them with that tuition, or they borrow money for that tuition, that they have a reasonable expectation of passing the professional exam. I don't look to your board for that pass-fail rate. I look to your board to guide the universities that are serving the students. So I do want to touch my intent is not that, but I'm just saying there should be a matter of attention that if the if the standards do need to be changed, that we do that, and we be cognizant that each of our, especially our state-funded universities, are living up to the obligation that we've made to our students.
Definitely. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Other questions by the committee?
The lady that just walked in, that's Dr. Deborah Atchison. She's vice chair, and she's from the Birmingham area, and she's a practicing clinical member of the board.
Did you want to, do you have more on your report, or are you ready for questions?
Unless you have any additional questions.
Yes, ma'am, I do. Kind of tying into what we had talked about on Tuesday, I've looked at a contract that's similar to what you do for another board, and I've looked even on this one, and this is on page 8 of your report, Ms. Dixie, where board entered into an emergency contract with an academic reviewer, and in that there were certain restrictions put in place, which was just to be for protection's sake, and it was $100 per hour not to exceed, a $10,000 number, and then they added, travel and reimbursement and such in there, and so that's sort of what I was getting to a couple of days ago when we talked. Yours, when it was under the emergency side of it, was like $15,000 for 2 months, so that's $7,500. And then the first emergency contract for the first year was $12,500 a month, and then the second emergency contract for the second year was $15,000. Then the third emergency contract was $23,500, and then of course that one duplicated for the fourth year. Which is another thing that we want to talk about on the emergency contracts. But there was no, so much per hour not to exceed that was in yours. And so, when I was talking with you about just the value of how we arrive at, rates or whatever, and my profession is the same. Well, if it is a monthly rate, we base that on hours, and then we'll reevaluate once a year. And on the other contract, it even had mention of percentage of time would be devoted to, of that firm would be devoted to just that board. And so those kind of things just made me think on the value that of the contract that you are under, how that works relating to the board. And so I guess what I'm getting to is we didn't get around to number of employees, number of hours, facilities, office space, conference room space, the things that may or may not be mentioned, because in that emergency contract, it didn't get into all those details. And
Right.
You said you're working on an RFP,
Right.
and I didn't know if on those years prior, if you could give me an idea about what you had devoted to this particular board that ties into these amounts. In other words, how did you come up with the amounts per month? I guess.
So this one is brand new and moving them to from Birmingham to Montgomery. So there were several moving mechanisms on this one. And so when we discovered the additional complaints and the time that we needed to devote for the investigative staff, and physically moving the office to Montgomery and facilitating all of the files and that kind of stuff.
That's 2020.
So it started out in 2020, and as we progressed and then physically moved the office, that's when the figures increased. And so for the RFP process, we're evaluating executive services, which is mine, the recording secretary, the public information officer. Then we get into investigative staff, legal staff. I don't have an attorney. I have a legal assistant and staff that covers all of that with the complaints and works with the investigators, the lawyers, and investigative committee. Then we have the administrative staff, which handles licensing and applications. Then we have the financial staff that handles all of the financial transactions, budgets, operations plans, certifying deposits, paying invoices, distributing funds. And so that plus we have those that are at the front desk. There are receptionists, greeters, that kind of thing. We will be adding a call center. This particular contract in the RFP are requiring that a specific number of staff be devoted directly to this board. And so this coming up one that we're working on now will have all of that detailed. And so there's not, with us not doing an hourly rate, we just I estimate how much time will be devoted in which, so those boards that do not have a lot of complaints, and there are some that do not.
Right.
So it depends on, first, the number of licensees, the amount of work that is involved in administrative licensing process, how many complaints you have, and how many investigators that I need to have on staff, and the legal assistants working on those, and then how much time will be spent in the financial operations office.
Yeah, these licensees, I think 2,700, is that right?
We have 2,700 in 2019, 2,600 in 2020, 2,700 in 21, 3,398 in 22, and 4,500 in 23. So with working in two different systems of databases that had not been fully implemented is how those numbers have really come true in 22 and 23 to determine exactly how many licenses that we do have. And so we're confident with those numbers of 22 and 23 that we have. So this board has 954 associate licensed counselors, 2,832 licensed professional counselors, and 715 supervisor counselors.
Yeah.
Or a total of
That's
4,501.
considerably more than what we had seen on the
Yes.
2,700. So
Yes,
yeah,
sir.
that. So the one you're working on, the RFP, is it going to have, like you said, it will have the number of employees that will be devoted specifically to this particular board?
Yes, it will. There are several stipulations that must be complied with from the provider, and all of there's a grading system that the procurement office and the board's representative created, and so it's a much different process moving forward that was released. There was a change mentioned in the workshop on Tuesday that the bid law has changed effective October the 1st of 2022, and the new procedures from the procurement office were released in March of 23. So the board started working on the process with the procurement office.
If I remember right, this board does have a couple of employees, right? Does it have some employees on the board?
Yes, in this new RFP, all employees will come under, because we have one retired state employee, and then we have one that is in an exempt position. So all of the employees will transition under my contract.
Okay. Was one of them like an executive director?
There was an executive director, and he resigned in November.
Okay.
So you'll see those numbers decrease on the personnel expenses, benefits expenses, and then they'll all fall under my responsibility of the new administrative contract.
Do you have an idea how many employees that might have been devoted to this particular board for the most current year?
There is one licensing specialist that is devoted. The rest of these are shared.
Gotcha.
And so moving forward, there will be two devoted, probably 2.5, and there will be between investigators and licensing staff, we'll be adding about 5 more individuals. But there will be probably 2.5, not probably, there will be 2.5 devoted specifically for the counseling board.
Investigators?
We will have a total of 4 in the fall.
Okay. Okay.
Representative Simpson?
And I'm sorry, forgive my ignorance here. Your RFP that you're working on, what services is that RFP for?
This one will be for the entire operations for all of staff, office space, anything that is non-board specific, meaning any type of license certificates, equipment specific for the board,
And
anything and everything. So you'll see those expenses in the past from personnel, office space, telephones. The only thing that won't be paid, the services for the website is hosted through the state. That will be the board's expense, but otherwise and the database is the board's expense. And then otherwise everything is under the administrative services contract.
okay, and you're working with the board to help draft that RFP?
I am not.
You're not?
No.
Who's working with the board to help draft that?
The
RFP?
attorney,
Is that Ms. Cootie?
that is,
Okay.
the board chair and the buyer and procurement officer at state procurement.
Okay.
So I'm not involved in that process at all.
Okay. Ms. Cootie, while she is the attorney for this, for this board. If I'm not mistaken, she's the attorney on the board with you next for the electrical contractors as well, right?
Correct.
How many boards does Ms. Cootie work with you on, where she's the legal counsel for the board?
Just those two.
Just those two? Okay.
The rest are represented by the Attorney General's office.
All right. We're down to 4 minutes. Any Representative Shedd?
We, as a legislative joint committee, I think it's our responsibility to ask some tough questions.
Yes, sir.
We only do that every 4 years. And that's a responsibility that we have as the process. Madam Chair, in the future, if we have anybody else run up to the microphone and take over without being recognized, would you ask security to escort them out?
Yes, sir.
That may be the way you do it in the court, but that's not the way we operate here.
I understand.
Thank you.
Any further questions or concerns from the members? All right, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Who will be coming up and giving the talk on your behalf? Was that you, Mr. Warren?
Yes, ma'am. I also have the correspondence that was emailed this morning. May I ask?
Yeah, but I also want you to introduce your board or
Yes,
anybody
ma'am.
that you have present.
Yes, ma'am. Good morning. This is the Electrical Contractors Board that is next. I have with me Jeremy Atchley, the chair, right here from Congressional District 6 in Dora, Alabama. We have Sean Rogers, who is vice chair from Geraldine, Alabama, who represents Congressional District 4. We have Fred Moore, who is from Mobile, who is a state at-large representative. We have Mr. Theodore Blunt from Mobile, who is a Congressional District 1 representative. We have Johnny Grimes from Pell City, who represents Congressional District 7. We have Robert Lamborn, who is from Alexander City, representing Congressional District 3. We have Mac McCreelis from Town Creek, Alabama, state at-large member. We have Ben Freeman from Hazel Green, Alabama, representing Congressional District 6. And we have Mr. Terry Wallace is also a member of the board from Congressional District 2, and he isn't able to be here due to a medical appointment. So I do apologize for.
Well,
Mr.
thank you
Wallace.
for having the majority of your board here. I appreciate their time and attention to this matter.
Thank you. May I start with the additional information that I just distributed from the questions from Tuesday?
Yes, sir.
So the first thing that was discussed was the the encumbered allotments being larger than what was needed, which affects the amount of funds, unobligated cash transferred to the general fund. And so in my observation Tuesday, it sounds like that's more across the board. There were several boards that had that issue. So again, I have talked with Ms. Thomas about this and the Comptroller's office, and we will come up and fix that finding so we do not have that in the future. So there's got to be some kind of better process to do that, especially since there's multiple boards with that issue. So we are devoted to correct that, and we will work with all of those entities to get that corrected. Also, with the first finding that was outlined regarding workforce. And so I know Representative Shedd stated on Tuesday about helping other organizations through grants and keeping board funds to themselves. But there are opportunities where the board could, like the Heating and Air Board, the Home Builders Board, the General Contractors Board, come up with a process, and that would take a statutory change, for those excess funds at the end of the year to be distributed to workforce initiatives, grants for education for the workforce. And so I will be working with the chair to get that on the agenda as a possibility of utilizing those excess funds, particularly since the workforce is not where it should be in the electrical world. And so the next thing is, starting on that memo, again addresses the contract, what is included I should have included in the other one, so I apologize for that. But that is another overview of what all is provided. On the next page, we just went over staff again. Executive Director, Chief Financial Officer, Recording Secretary, Executive Secretary, additional one there coming, Executive Assistant, Public Information, 2 administrators, Licensing Specialist, Receptionist, Legal Assistant, Investigator. So I just reviewed that previously, but that's a breakdown of that as well. So number 4 states that all administrative services after this process will fall under, and there will be no board employees that are paid through management fees. And so this is a huge cost savings to the board with not being responsible for retirement benefits, payroll taxes, annual leave, longevity payments, and all of that. And so I also provided a comparison that I provided to the governor's office and several legislators during the session when this was being brought up. And so you can see some comparable data there for your review. Complaints, this is a high complaint volume for this board. You can see this year we have 95 complaints already. So this is a very complaint-driven board, and they only increase. So that is the need for my firm to add investigators on behalf of the board. We have a policy to have complaints received, acknowledged, investigated, and submitted to the investigative committee within 30 to 45 days. So complaints do not need to linger since we have the job of protecting the public, and so that is one of the policies that we have. But this is one of the largest complaint-driven boards that I manage and oversee. So the only other issue is the provisional license that we introduced legislation. Of course, on the back page of that, you can see all the years that I have. The board has submitted legislation beginning in 2012 when this issue was brought forward, and even 2023, this legislative session, we got it all the way through the House, but did not get it on committee to go through the process in the Senate. So there's opportunities in that bill, if brought forward again, that we proposed no cost to examinations to get those individuals holding a provisional license to upgrade their license to an electrical contractor's license, which is statewide authority. So so they could work in the entire state without any restrictions other than buying a local license or pulling a permit from the electrical departments that exist throughout the state. So we are trying and have tried to fix that. I know there are Representative Simpson has some concerns about that also. We have an explanation that's also that we provided comments on from legal counsel that did some research and work on that to respond to you. So I'll ask her before we move any further because she would like to go over that legally. And I'm sure there's several board members that are present that may have been involved in that in 2010 and 2012 as well.
Please come forward and address that.
Ms. Cootie?
Oh, thank you. Yes, thank you. We realize that we're in a conundrum with this situation. When the statewide licensing requirement was passed in Alabama in 2010, there were some 1,200 people, mainly mom and pops, who absolutely refused to take a statewide exam. There's some people in the Alabama legislature that hold provisional licenses. You might ask them what their reason was for not sitting for a statewide exam. What we were told over and over and over again by people that have been practicing for decades: I can wire a house in my sleep, but if I have to take a test, I freeze. Some of these people only have education in electrical issues. They're not widely educated or sophisticated. Because we have a mandate from the legislature to provide safe, competent, regulated electrical work throughout the state, if we had not issued some sort of license, and I'm going to explain it more, that it's a very limited license ladies and gentlemen, it is only for the area where they have a local license. Some of them didn't have to pass a test for that. Some of them just had to show up and pay it, but they must stay in their sandbox. It's like if a locality said, we're going to issue our own driver's license. State of Alabama say, that's fine, but don't you drive outside your sandbox. You know, you haven't been tested to operate outside your locality. So these 1,200 people, we could have either sent them cease and desist letters and put them out of work immediately. No way to buy groceries, take care of their families, taxes. I know it's not perfect. But they had not taken an examination as we require for electrical contractors and journeymen. Currently we have 700. We've had an attrition of 500 due to retirement or death, getting out of the business. We have never had a provisional complain about the fee. And I totally understand that there is no direct authority in the code, but let me point you to some authority that as an attorney, I would argue before any court of law and before you today. The Alabama Electrical Contractors Act, the definitions are a declaration of purpose is found at 3436-2. This act is for the purpose of safeguarding homeowners and other property owners and tenants against faulty, inadequate, inefficient, or unsafe electrical installations, and to protect the life, health, and property of homeowners, other property owners, and tenants in the state of Alabama. Ladies and gentlemen, I tell you right now, that doesn't exempt any part of Alabama. We have to make sure that every Alabama citizen is safe, not just some. No part of this chapter exempts any part of the state of Alabama. But in order to regulate these people that are in these pockets of localities, we must issue them a license so we have jurisdiction over them. If we don't have jurisdiction and they don't have some sort of license from us, then they're out of business. It's a cease and desist. It's put your screwdriver down, you're gone. And honestly, and this was back in 2011, and I had just come on as board attorney then. I really didn't have a lot of the background then. But it was the boards, and you know, boards change every year. But at that point, the board said, we can't do that to these people. So many of them could point to people that worked for them that could wire a house better than anybody they'd ever seen. But the poor soul could not pass a written examination. And I don't know if any of y'all have ever suffered from that or know somebody like that. It was just the better of two consequences. Keep people working, but also keep us involved so we can make sure that the wiring is adequate. 75% of injury from fire is a result of electrical malfunction or an unskilled person attempting to work with electricity, and that's according to the National Fire Protection Association. Y'all, electricity is dangerous. If you hire an unskilled plumber, you're going to have a mess to clean up. If you hire an unskilled electrician, you may have a funeral or several to plan. It's nothing to be left to the people that don't know what they're doing. And that's where the board comes in, is to make sure that when we get complaints about these people, we work those complaints. We talk to both sides. We talk to the complainant. Our investigator goes and visits face-to-face, if at all possible, and meets with the respondent. We ask the respondent to give us a written reply and send us documents. Tell us your side of the story. We're not against not licensing people. We just want them to do it right. This day, we've come so far since 2011. We have such home technology advancements, it blows my mind, and I'm not technical. We have electric vehicles coming, y'all. We have solar. The world is blowing up.
If we could limit our conversation to this right here.
Yes,
I'd
ma'am.
greatly appreciate it.
Yes,
Have you
ma'am.
concluded your remarks so we can get to the questions, or do you have another point to make?
This is what I want to say. I've got one more point, Ms. Wilcox, thank you. Alabama Code 34364C states that the board may adopt rules and regulations to carry out this chapter. Administrative rules are broadly interpreted, and boards are given the wide authority to carry out the mandates of the statute in their rules. And I would argue here today that that's what we did. We're protecting the state of Alabama, and we have a rule for provisional. If you want us to modify that, I am certainly open to your direction and ideas. Do you have any questions, ma'am?
All righty. Representative Simpson, you have the floor.
Since we're going on to dialogues, I want to go on a dialogue here, and this is my problem with what we have, and this is why I don't trust you.
You don't trust me, sir?
No, you asked earlier if I trusted you, and I said no, I don't, and this is why I don't. This board has receipts as of the 2022 fiscal year of $825,880. Of that expenditure, $420,000 goes to Smith Warren, and you have a contract not to exceed $110,000.
Yes,
So
sir.
we're talking professional services about $530,000, which is almost over half of what this board goes to.
Sir, I can't speak to
I'm finished. I
any-
let you talk. This is my turn to talk. You know statutorily, and you have known since 2012, that statutorily the board did not have the legal authority for the $75 fee. Have known it. And you've talked about the legislation, and we've gone through the legislation that you've tried to pass and the reasons that has not passed. I'm not here to talk about the reasons that has not passed. You have known you do not have the statutory authority to do this, yet still, after being brought out in 2018 at the 2018 Sunset Committee, where we've said this is a significant issue, you do not have the authority to do this. As you stand here today, you are still offering a fee and taking a fee from contractors, from electrical contractors, that you have no statutory authority to do, and over half of the money that this board receives goes to professional services for you and Mr. Warren. So yeah, that's my concern with what we have here, because you have the hard everyday worker that has to get this requirement to get this fee to go through, and their fees are just going to administrative costs and going to these outrageous fees of $35,000 a month plus a $10,000 a month for legal services through there. So our responsibility is to look out for not only the law that is clearly not being followed in this case, but also the constituents and the members of the people that live in the state of Alabama, to make sure there's not some rogue board charging a rogue fee that they don't have authority for, that the board and the administration for the board puts into their pocket.
Thank you, sir. Do I have any board members that would like to address?
Let's hold on just a second if we could. I wasn't here.
Mr. Barfoot, Senator, I can't speak to any other fees but my own.
Right.
I have nothing to do with what the board votes to expend in fees.
Give me just a second. I'd like to be either myself or the co-chair call somebody up and give them an opportunity. But any other questions along the lines, and I apologize, I had to go let them know they're on the floor. So back now, any other questions or comments along the lines of what Representative Simpson was asking? If not, if anybody in the audience wants to address that, give an explanation, be glad to hear from them.
We will suspend that fee effective immediately. We will call an emergency meeting of the board and suspend that fee immediately.
Let me, and I apologize again, maybe I went over this, but what if it's easy enough to suspend the fee now, why has that not been done prior to, with an acknowledgement that it's, unlawful?
Legal representation, when we were discussing this, because of the number of complaints and investigations that are performed for provisional licensees, And at the last sunset, when we were talking about this, and Senator Coleman Madison was present and was aware of the conversation, and to answer your question, no one has said stop. We've tried to correct it legislatively, but as of today, we will take care of that right now.
Okay. I don't know where we're at in the process. Was that the first comment or question? Okay. All right. And I don't know, I apologize, Mr. Warren, I don't know whether you were going through those significant findings and where you were in that process, but to the extent you were, and if you want to continue with that, that's certainly.
We've covered all of them. We've covered workforce, we've covered the encumbrances, and then that one was number 3.
Okay.
So we have covered those. If there are any other questions, I will volunteer any of the board chairs and the attorneys and the procurement office to entertain questions about how this is going moving forward. I know of the questions that have been raised. We are addressing those. I'm doing everything I can to give you the information, the documentation of what all I provide under my contract compared to what a standalone board and an office would expend. Once the contract is finalized, I will distribute that to all members of the committee as quickly as possible. And I know these are questions for each board. I have gotten 3 boards during the pandemic that were unexpected. I'm not out drumming up business. One executive director passed away unexpectedly. And so there's plenty of room for boards to go to other providers. If you have any specific questions, I will definitely put you in contact with those individuals about the specifics of, why they choose me as a vendor. I think they have the right to explain that as well. But we are going through a much more transparent process of exactly what those fees go for in the contracts. And so those questions are being answered through this process.
Thank you, Mr. Warren. Members, questions, comments, concerns?
On workforce development, we heard an example earlier how an application fee or a testing fee had been waived, and I noticed that you also have some workforce pipeline issues as well. Have y'all, and then you've also your pass-fail rate. Does the board look at that and see how they can't recruit more people to take the test and also have people have success when taking that test? Can you tell me of their efforts, please?
Yes, ma'am. So it is a national exam. The board reviews those percentages and pass-fail rates at every meeting. There are several board members that have apprenticeship programs themselves. There are a lot of initiatives out there that they work with for getting and approved for apprentice programs that they work at their companies. And so one of the things that was brought up the other day was slimlining the documentation for journeymen. We would definitely entertain, but I don't think we can waive fees statutorily unless it was in the statute to waive a fee. But we're trying to make the process and remove as many barriers to the journeyman license as possible. We have, in fact, discussed that on Monday.
And I'd appreciate it if y'all would make that a part of any report, any future reports showing where you had cut down and made the regulations less burdensome on our citizens to enter into this field.
Yes, ma'am. We will add that to the quarterly reports that we submit to the examiners and to the committee.
And I appreciate the board, their attention to this matter. Thank you so much, and I appreciate the fact that y'all review it at every meeting.
All right. Anybody else in the audience want to make a comment? Okay. Members? Yes, sir.
I apologize for I've not studied over what you had sent. You might have addressed this in this printout we got, so I apologize if I'm duplicating a question that's in your explanation here. My one question is on the encumbrances again. Just to restate, the 2021, I think the difference was, our report was a little bit off. The difference was $8,673.82. It's on page 7 of your report. I think maybe one of the numbers was off, and you explained that. But I think the difference is $86.73.82 in the first year. Yeah, right. Yeah. but the difference is the 8,600 roughly. Yeah, and 82 cents. The following year, I think the difference was 21,700. Year 3, that's not really an encumbrance. Year 3 was the amount that was from the unreserved cash balance, the transfer that's made to the general fund. And then number 4, I think it was 19,271 off. And I know we talked about, there were estimates, but so make sure I got the process down of what I expect to be, what my expectations of typical are. The encumbrances in the final year of the fiscal year are things that we have expended, but not paid.
That's
Then they're
correct.
paid in the following month. They're paid, and then those expenses are known. And so really they're sort of known in the last year because we will receive an invoice that's got a due date of 15 days or whatever, 10 days, and get the percentage discount, that sort of thing. So we really know what the numbers are in the final month, and then we pay them in the month after. And then there's like 3.5 months until it's sent over, like January the 15th, I think, before it's sent over to the general fund. And so for me, it seems like those numbers should be finalized within 30 days, actually. And I think I read in here that the CFO is the one that, I think the word it used was estimates the numbers in the final month. Is that
The encumbrances.
CFO? Is that your CFO, or is
Yes,
that
mine.
someone?
That's mine. And so we're starting to prepare encumbrances now that are due August the 14th or 15th, one of those 2 days, to prepare for services and expenses from that date to the end of September, which is the end of the fiscal year. And then once we roll over and the state opens on October the 1st, then the comptroller's office that helps us determine that number. And that's what Ms. Thomas and I have discussed of why is it on our end? Because I know there was a discrepancy in how much we each actually reverted one year. One was more, one was less. And so there's got to be something's missing, and we're going to find out what it is.
Yeah. Do those invoices come to you or to the comptroller's office?
They come to our office.
Okay, so you have the invoices and you know what they are, but do you record those invoices, or do you just send them over to the comptroller?
No, they're recorded and entered into the system for review prior to payment of the comptroller's office.
Okay.
Things that we have to estimate or travel for investigators.
Got it.
Travel for board meetings in case we have a board meeting that's coming up or a special called meeting. We have legal services that we estimate of what those legal services will be for that 45-day period. Have to stop and guesstimate from the middle of August to the end of September.
Yeah, that's the part I think I've been missing. So why do we cut off in the middle of August?
That's a question I cannot answer. That's always been, that's a state operations thing.
Okay. All right. So that's part I've been missing. Okay.
Okay.
I'm sorry, Ms. Wilcox, may I add one more question? So if we don't unencumber those funds, then we don't have the funds available to pay that invoice, and then that invoice has to be submitted to Board of Adjustment to be paid through that process. So that's why we have tried to narrow down that estimate as much as possible. But we're working on it. There's still got to be a better process, but yes, sir.
Yeah, the August 15th cutoff is what I was missing.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
My question is a follow-up on the schedule of fees, and I'll ask any attorney present, either your board attorney or Representative Simpson, or Senator Barfoot, pardon me.
Leave me out of that.
But Mrs. Thomas, as I understand this, these fees are actually set by administrative rule. They're not set by legislation. So the board does indeed have the power
That's
to
correct.
adjust their fees.
Yes, ma'am. Mhm.
Okay, I thought that you were saying that I thought I heard you say they were set by statute.
Oh, no, ma'am. They're set by regulation, and so we
Okay.
can vote for the board to repeal that rule ASAP. They are in administrative rules.
And any other fees that they see fit to lower or waive.
Yes.
Okay.
And just historical, when the law passed in 2010, in 2011, when we were proposing the fees, we reduced the $200 licensing fee for electrical contractor to $150. So we did lower that, knowing that our numbers would increase with receiving applicants for licensing.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Question, so, any of these boards, agencies that are subject to sunset, are they also subject to legislative council review for regulations? Do y'all,
Yes.
okay. Members, questions, comments, concerns? Again, give an opportunity for anybody in the audience who wants to be heard by the committee. If not, thank y'all so much for coming. One follow-up.
What's the deadline? You might have already said this, I missed it. The deadline for those RFPs for the contracts upcoming, when is that?
It has been passed and submitted to the procurement office for review. That's where it is right now.
And at that point in time is when it will be open for others, or is it already passed?
That's already passed.
All right,
And so
so-
procurement's reviewing it, and then the contract will be prepared between the procurement office and the board's attorney, and then presented to contract review. Hopefully by the September contract review committee.
Got you.
Yes,
All right,
sir.
thanks, sir.
All right, thank you. Nothing else, then we stand in for a break, and we'll be back at 12:30. Thank y'all.
All right. Thank you. Thank you.